Good evening, everybody. It is 5 o'clock p.m. EST here in sweltering Brooklyn, New York. My name is Max Cohen. I'm the lead writer for the Museum of Crypto Art, and this is the Mocha Live podcast. Joining me as he does every week, the founder of the Museum of Crypto Art, Colborne Bell. Hi, Colborne.
Hello, Max.
And a very special guest this week, all the way from Miami, Florida, Andres Siegelboim, who just taught me how to pronounce his name. And we are talking art today. We are not talking about the market, at least not directly. We wanted to sit down and talk about crypto art on like an actual art making artistic level and not just as beholden to the financial whims of the larger cryptocurrency market. So art, why do we do it? What do we feel when we do it? What does it grant us? Colborne, this was kind of your topic when you at least like broach it to me, talking about energy and kind of the spirituality. I know that you always give me that reaction when I say that like you came to the concept. But what was your like thought process?
I gotta say, as you were just describing this to me, I'm like, this is not the conversation that I signed up for.
Bro, I make the notes every week. You're supposed to look at the notes. Okay,
I looked at the note. I don't know. I just had this. I had this nice reaction to this quote that like blockchain is not about money. It's about like the energy transference and reconnecting with the human value, right? So it's about like disambiguating. If we know U.S. dollar, like what are the values associated with U.S. dollars? For me, it's like this long legacy of war and colonialism and global policing, and it's like, how do we begin to attract and put new values into this money? So
different than what I was saying.
A little bit. A lot of it is art, of course, right? It's like the transmutation of the ethereal into the object itself, and what does that object come to like stand for and represent? So how is that just abstracted one layer beyond into the token, and kind of the movement was where I was hoping to kick things off, I guess.
So I just really quick, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that was a piece in the Genesis collection by Carlos Marcial, the Memorial, which is the gun. It's like some kind of a pistol wrapped in fiat currency, and it's a layered async artwork, and each of the layers is a different skin of a different global currency. And when I wrote about that piece, it was interesting because it wasn't the currencies you'd expect, the ones associated with like colonialism and imperialism. I think there was a Venezuelan fiat currency, there was an African fiat currency, so there was currency from both like colonialist and imperialist countries, and also ones that may have been colonized and imperialized. So perhaps it's something about, I don't know, there's like the dollar of it all, but then there's also like the fiat of it all.
It's just government currency, right? What does it mean to have government currency, and what does it mean to have people's currency, and what does it mean to have like a contemporary art market, and what does it mean to have like this pseudo emerging new idea of something?
Andres, what do you think it means?
Oh man, I mean, fuck. I've been. I love talking about this shit because we've predicted it since the '70s, and we predicted it from the occult side of things. You're welcome. There's a book by, I think it's Robert Anton Wilson, called Illuminatus, which the first one's fucking rock solid. It's all about secret societies, whether they exist or they don't, sleeper cells, weird shit, the eminentization of the eschaton, which is another weird Christian word for creating the apocalypse, making it happen. And one of the subplots of this book, and one of the cultural parts of this book, is that you fall around these cultural pirates, and they don't run on fiat currency at all. They run strictly on a barter system that uses coins. They use barley coin and shit. And I remember reading it and going, oh, that's cool. It's kind of cute. And then I see it happen in real life at like 3 or 4 years after reading the book. And I go, holy shit. But yeah, you're welcome. We put that in motion for you. You know, you can give me all of the fiat now in exchange for your coins.
Colbert, how does blockchain address that?
Because there really is no centralized authority dictating what it is, right? Mm-hmm. The rules were set in stone long ago, so it's very much a human system. Bitcoin could be worth zero, right? The only reason it's worth something is because people came, they used it, and they said it was worth money, right? So think of all of the ways over time that the idea of money has changed, the way it's moved, you know, off of a gold standard, or all of the ways that it is pegged to some sort of value. right? And all of it is just what is facilitating commerce like the most, right? The only thing we generally ask of, the thing that we use is that it has a high velocity, right? That it's easily transactable, that it's and that is kind of like what the purpose is to be able to take this nothing thing or this fungible thing in a dollar and be able to exchange it for something that we need.
So when you say like energy capture as you did before, are you saying like literally allowing as many people as possible to partake in the valuation of a thing or in the experience of the thing as possible? Like are you alluding more to like the accessibility side of blockchain as opposed to say like the American currency, which is sequestered within American politics, American
So
economics, American culture?
when I kind of think of like US dollar hegemony and what the dollar captures, well, the dollar is literally capturing oil, right? It's capturing all of this, and this is how people like
And natural
move. This
gas.
is sure, and natural gas, but it's mostly like oil, right? I think 70-80% of futures trades is denominated in oil. This is how nations move. This is the like number one input for all of these things. And then when you think about like Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin is literally capturing generally electricity. It's mining in a different sense, So then people, they capture it, they mine it. It becomes more scarce over time as it happens, and more people are kind of drawn to it because of the price, right? But it's interesting when like from a distance we are able to, this is all where it gets a bit woo-woo, like transmit and put ideology onto these symbols and these things that are inherently digital.
Yes, heard. And that's interesting. And I think that this also relates back to artistry. Um, because I think that the nature of what you're saying, or at least how it sounds to me, is that again, it's not just that there's no central authority, it's that there's no central value system to apply it to, which is essentially what like a government is. It's a centralized value system. But I think that there's a conversation here about the art because I think that like the culture of crypto art is going to reflect the culture of cryptocurrency, obviously. But down the road with this kind of energy capture, like I wonder, I've talked a lot about this, but like this kind of a geographic, a political, a cultural, like no man's land in which all this kind of cryptocurrency world exists that like kind of must exist in like a global public forum like Twitter. Um, Andres, I'm curious. I have a couple questions off of this, but like, is there a sect of your collector base that is like identifiably from a certain region or culture, or do you find that you are being kind of pulled all over the world in terms of what you create, in terms of the inspirations for what you create?
It's weird because I find that there's no monoculture, right? We're on a full many microcultures type beat right now. And I find that my collectors are from everywhere at this point. I mean, I have some that are in Hong Kong, I have some that are in England, I have some that are in Scotland, I have some that are in America, I have some that are in Mexico, and now that's a lot of ego there, but it's true. It's like there's just it's from everywhere, and it's really just people that resonate with um, my art, and I hope with me as a person, right? Like that's also part of it. But I do find that with me, what is happening, and maybe what I'm intending, is that like is attracting like as much as humanly possible. I do love being able to be friends with my collectors. Like, it's really wonderful to have relationships with everybody, and it's that for me is the thing. But it has nothing. I don't think. Yeah, I think we're past. I think all of this transcends these national, international, cultural, financial boundaries 100% of the way.
Yeah, I mean, it represents like a kind of the only way out is through kind of phenomenon. Because what's going to happen again, if you have collectors from all over the world, or you have these connections to people from all over the world, then instead of being drawn further and further in like the direction of like the influence of one place, say if you're making art in New York and you're only interacting with people who are based in New York and only selling work to people based in New York, you're going to be influenced consciously and subconsciously to make certain works that vibe with exactly what kind of
Oh yes.
energy is being transmitted throughout New York at that time. What were you
Yeah.
going to say?
Look at fucking I'm sorry to no if they're listening. Look at for swearing, but look at the way that New York was in the 80s and into the 90s and 70s and so forth in terms of, we think of these periods in time as being larger than life, and they very much were. That every man and woman is a star in a galaxy, right? Like that's 1,000 lives wrapped into one. But when you look at an actual art market population based on how it was with cities, you really are talking about 500 people orbiting around one another at any given time. Basquiat's New York was 500 odd artists living in the Lower East Side, plus the gallerists, curators, writers that lived alongside them, right? Your Andy Warhol stopping in at the bodega, right? It's that kind of thing. And I think what we're seeing now as this trend is, and maybe that'll change based on the social media and which social media is being consumed by each person, but we're seeing a population of people interacting on one part of a public forum that are orbiting around each other at any given time, right? We're all very much like, it's not even 5 degrees of separation. It's really 1 or 2 at any given moment in where we are in terms of crypto, for what I'm imagining is right now, crypto Twitter, right?
Sure. Coburn, what do you think about this idea of not having a monoculture, but having many microcultures, especially like within crypto art?
I think that's right, and it's something I think is ultimately aspirational. I feel like through the 90s and into the 2000s, there was this big idea that we could have like this ultra national. I just think COVID kind of like broke down everything that was ultimately that dream of this like global, interconnected, everybody like being able to access and get to the same thing. And I've talked before, I think, about what has increasingly become like a global monoculture, right? Like when you travel, all the Airbnbs are the same, all the tech design looks the same, like everything is trying to influence us in one direction. But there's still like localization elements that are generally, I think, like being taken away, but they're finding themselves online in these like geographical, asynchronous spaces.
Totally. And I guess like that's not always, when you say like cultural, of course, it's not always like geographic. Like Andres, I think that your work has like a real cultural aesthetic to it, although I'm not necessarily sure how to encapsulate that. I don't think it's necessarily like a geographic, or even, I mean, I know you're into like occult stuff, so maybe it's like an occult kind of mythological culture. Could you describe that, by the way? Like how it should.
Sure. The thing about me is that I'm from Venezuela, which I was raised in Caracas since I was about 4. But my great grandparents moved down from, I think, mixed Eastern Europe, and settled down. So it's 3 generations deep of spice. Sorry, but I can't help it. But like, so we have this mix of cultures, yeah. In terms of, you have diasporic Jews. So you have diasporic Jews that come from a desert culture with its own music that is influenced by the desert, its own way of being influenced by the desert, and also being influenced by constantly having to uproot and move around a touch and a ton, up and through Europe, different directions, and then eventually move to South America. And and then from South America, right, on top of going from desert nomadic culture to suddenly like mountains and jungle and mountain basin, like super hot heat culture, suddenly, like I'm diaspora again, and we moved to the United States. So from there, tons of stuff become readily available for me. So for me, interacting with these various cultures, like I feel like I'm a homogenous, heterogeneous mix of anything that I come into contact with, because I never really got to grab a hold of like a single place of living, both myself or like the people before me. So like I grab from everything. Like in America, I really caught into like blues music, for example, and that's like part of me now. And it's interesting. It's interesting. I think as an artist, I'm sure you can relate as a writer, and Colbert, I'm sure you can relate as well. It's just like you know, you you kind of spend a little bit of time as you continue to grow, grappling with your identity, and especially as in early development for me, it was like, am I a Jewish artist? Am I a Venezuelan artist? Right? It's like, am I an American? Am I not? Am I an occultist? Right? Which came much more to the fore later on, because the world of surrealism and the occult by its own stretch, because they are related, really is about taking everything and collaging it together. And so for me, that functions really well, both as a person, as an artist, and as a magician and spiritual person. They all kind of blend. It's really it's really about collage for me in a strange way.
Interesting. So I'm a fourth or fifth generation American. Like I've been here forever, right? So much so that like whatever roots I have, mostly in Eastern Europe, are all but gone from my family, right? I was never raised in any specific way. I have a dear friend who she's Russian, and her mother immigrated from Russia, and her sister grew up with all these Russian cultures, and her sister's husband was born in the USSR. So like a lot of direct cultural affectation on her life. And through the prism of her, I've been able to see that like there's not a ton, it doesn't appear that there's a ton of culture or like cultural touchstones within my version of America, right? You have this kind of like, I know Andres just mentioned the like the blues, right? You have this like, I think it's a lot stronger in the South than it is in the North at this point in the country, but we're like acultural as it relates to a certain kind of, I don't know, we obviously have economic culture and we have entertainment culture, but we don't have this like underlying connective tissue of traditions and events and touchstones, at least from what I've seen. And I agree, it's like very hard to situate yourself within that. And especially as I came into crypto art, and you see so many people struggling, I think, with how much of their own identity to imbue into their art, or how much of their own culture is then coming into contact with this weird like always online Twitter culture, the mono micro culture. It is hard to I think situate oneself within that.
Yeah, 100%.
Colburn, any thoughts on that?
You know, I go back to like pretty much like how clear cut perhaps the 1950s American identity was, right? And you know that there were just like pretty much rules for how to be, how to exist, what people were doing, and for the most part, like they weren't very pretty. Now, if I try and like, I can think of that time, and I can think of like the 60s, and I can think of the 70s, and there seems to be this way that it was. But once you start thinking about like times that we lived, like the 2000s or 2010s, does it have that same like distinct identity? And for me, the answer is no. And then I think about the things that like I've been running from as an American, like the overconsumption and just like the sit in front of the TV and zone out. And you know, whatever you do, like some 40-year career job to get like a gold watch, and then they like bury you. I don't know, you know, so much of that culture we exported, and it feels kind of like some of those chickens are coming home to roost, and it's almost like the people are different now, or some people have decided to be different than like the machina, the machine of American capitalism that has been created, and those two identities are no longer aligned.
Yeah.
Colburn, do you think that American artists have a hegemony in some respect over crypto art?
I don't think so. I can't, if I'm like real talk, like sitting here thinking about it now, can I think of like who would be, I can barely even think of an American artist. I don't even feel like I would consider Andres American artist. There's a lot of artists who I don't even think of as American artists, which is so interesting. I guess like for me, the American artist is Beeple, right?
Nah, man, die with the most.
Well, yeah.
Come on, bro. We can't be doing die dirty like this. That is, I think it comes down to, I think when it comes down to anything, and you know, I think that we have the the very human condition of living through our times and not being able to see them from the outside. But if you look back on, say, it's like Adina loves Clueless. Clueless has a look and an aesthetic that like people are actually bopping to now because it's what they grew up with. But as far as art goes, I've maintained and finally experimented. I've maintained the idea of and finally physically experimented with the idea that as an artist is a reactive to being, right? I was gonna say creature, but that's kind of fucked up. But like we're constantly reacting to our own like karmas and patterns or whatever. I said the same thing twice just now. And we're constantly reacting to ourselves and we're reacting to the culture that we belong to. And in crypto art, we're seeing artists, like you can react to the crypto art culture, right? But I think an American artist, when I think of an American artist, I want to see someone reacting to American culture. And I actually think almost immediately of when I think of an American artist reacting to American culture, even though he's a commercial director, is a Tim Burton with an Edward Scissorhands, for example, where that's like, we are fully critiquing the it's you got the kind of not McMansion, but so you got your kind of like your model house with your model car with your model wife. And this is not my beautiful wife. This is not my beautiful house. How did I get here?
Hold on, I got to throw that back a little bit because I think that what something like Edward Scissorhands it's the median point, but that becomes the culture that we're then, I think, collectively referring to. I think a lot of what America is and a lot of what American art is a metaculture on top of itself. And I don't say that just because a lot of the art is meta-referential, especially in like the television and movie and literature world. I mean, the very fact that so much of our quote unquote like high-minded art is all of this meta stuff. It's writing about writing, it's filmmaking about filmmaking. Like to an extent, yeah. I mean, it's onanistic to an extent, but I think it's also it's hard to see the culture of America unless you're really, really perceptive. It's a lot easier to see the Tim Burton version of America and then formulate a reaction based on that. I think that there's a real reason why, say, like when I am thinking about seeing a movie, I read a review for that movie, and then I read reviews, critical reviews. Conversely, after I go see a movie, I also read critical reviews because I want to have my initial thoughts confirmed or denied. And then what I end up with is a cognitive process that is reactive to the reaction more than it's reactive to the stimulus itself, or at least in large part reactive to the reaction. And I think with an absence in America of these deeper seated kind of untouchable touchstones, what we have are cultures that are responding to responses. It's a culture that's responding to Clueless, where Clueless itself is a commentary on the culture. And maybe that's unavoidable, but it seems like all we have, and I see it in Die with the Most Likes too. It's like he's responding to a funhouse mirror version of America to begin with. It's almost like
I don't know, man. I think that's real for him. I think what he sees is real in Indiana. Yeah.
Fair enough.
This is not your like West Coast, East Coast liberal elite. Like this is I've been to the Iowa State Fair. Like I've seen some things, you've
seen them really fucking that grass, man. It's no joke.
Yeah. It's yeah.
But even deep fried butter is beautiful. Yes. And there's none of that beauty in Die with the Most Likes' work. There is a beauty about it, but it is not beautiful artwork. It's meant to like deny beauty. I think that's kind of its purpose, is to be so grotesque and so horrifying. Wow, you guys are both looking up at your individual ceilings in deep thought. I'm gonna bring this around. I love Die with the Most Likes artwork, but I think that it is still it's segmented. It's very specific in what parts of a life it's capturing, right? Like, I don't think that that's necessarily a fault or even like a criticism of the artwork. It's just the reality of, I think, having a negative take or a positive take on anything is it's only going to be a segment of the actual whole. And I think that that's more or less what these reactions, like what a critical analysis of a film or a book is a slice of a perspective of the whole. You can't get the whole view of the entire thing. Am I making any sense at all, Andres?
No. I totally. I had a feeling we were gonna talk about this today, and I'm actually really excited. I'm supercharged today. I was so excited for this because I knew we were gonna have a great conversation. I've come to my little slice of experience is that it comes down to the artist as a magician and the artist as a mystic. What's the difference? The difference is that a mystic is seeking communion with the world around them and a sense of unity, with something much grander, with whatever name you want to put to it. It's like source, God, the universe, the world, the physical world, the spiritual world, all that stuff. The magician is trying to make things happen and change things within their context of that world in their present materialish reality, or not. But what I mean by this in an artistic sense is that we have some people like myself, I'd argue like Dai, where you are reflecting the mirror cracked, or you are creating your own reality as a response to your current reality, right? And then you have someone like I would, this is going to be a hot ass take, but the people that are more mystical, that find incredible beauty in the world around them. And I would argue like an Andy Warhol, for example, where it's like we're even the ugly parts of the world around them, the pop culture, all that stuff, is like it becomes a can of soup becomes everything. You know what I mean? And it's like I admire that, because for me, an artist that can manage that, because for me, I've always been an escape artist since I was young. Because of moving a lot, I've had to grab hold of both any world that I could in fantasy, right? So for me, it appeals to me to create fantasy and to be that magician in as many aspects as I possibly can be. But the mystic is always the one that's always the most contented, because they can look at the objects, the nature or the detritus around them, and not embellish that fact. They can look at it and see the beauty in it, right? It's a painter painting a nature scene or a discarded Pringles bag, right? It's really about. I think that for me, that's where I divide a lot of the art that I like. When I find it really effective, is it does either that, it either takes me somewhere completely incredibly personal and intimate and fantastical, or it roots me back down to reality and gives me that sense of unity when I see it portrayed. So I don't know. That's
just like the floating trash bag in American Beauty.
Just so, yeah, exactly that one. Yeah, or Not Another Teen Movie, which equally relevant.
I'm trying to find an artwork in the Genesis collection. Colbert, maybe you can refresh my memory. It's the close-up image of the poppy that is made like ghostly.
Yeah, Luna Acutis, California Poppy.
Thank you. Luna Acutis' California Poppy. So Andres, you were talking about finding beauty in the natural world, and I love this piece specifically. It's this like very close-up, colorless, translucent view of a poppy flower. And who's the artist name again, Colbert? I'm so sorry.
Luna Acuta.
Luna Acuta. So Luna has a series of flowers that, again, are basically produced exactly like this. The color is sapped out. They're made like translucent and ghostly and zoomed up really close. And it is finding an entirely new world of associations and of memetics within like a recognizable object. And you're like in the same time both aware of the object being exactly what you think it is, but it's also like indelibly changed. You're like both finding the object in itself and being like repulsed away from all the associations you have of the object. The poppy is red, the poppy as, having a stem that's recognizable from the petals, and the petals having certain like kinds of fragility. There are like little air bubbles in it, and it's a fantastic piece.
You would think one that at first glance, you would think this has to be 3D. You could think, how could this actually be real? But no, she strips it of all its chlorophyll. She strips it and she inserts them into aquariums that are filled with water and places them and it gives them like this very ghostly, natural motion. It's incredible work. Yeah, shout out Luna Acuta.
That's amazing. You see, but this is like me and Adina at a Barnes & Noble, and we pick up a book on close-ups of bugs, and it is the mystical expression. It's the universe in a grain of sand, right? It's like for me, again, very beautiful, because for me as an artist, it's something in me stops me from doing that kind of work. And I always look at that work and I'm like, that is really absolutely beautiful, but my soul is drawn somewhere else for some reason. So I appreciate the hell out of it, honestly. It's and yeah, it's for me it's really hard to do also, because I just can't really sit still that way, in terms of the creative, what comes out, right?
I think, although Andres, I want to respond to this. There's the you mentioned this idea of like there being, of course, a difference between magic and mysticism, and I think that there is not always that divide, which I think is important, because I think you put a pretty clear pillar between them, right? It's like
I did
having
a
an
very
effect on the.
masculine thing where I said there's only two, but it's like, but it's true. It's very blurry. When I started really taking my esoteric study seriously, it was given to me through a course book, and it essentially was like, what are the differences between these two experiences of embracing reality and altering reality, right? And that sort of thing. And it is 100% a blurred line. And what was said to me very early on by a very great teacher was, the magician doesn't think they're a mystic until they're inevitably a mystic, because you're engaging with these different processes of the world anyway, and it becomes intimately linked to you, which probably doesn't make too much sense in this, but what I'm trying to say is that the line's super blurry almost all the time, right? It's like you're finding a whole universe in this image of this flower, right? It's like, well, your brain's reacting. It's like, what are your associations, right? It's like you're intaking all this information and something else is coming out, right? This poetry is coming out instead, and that's yeah.
I guess all I meant is I think like mystics are inherently magical by this definition, because to be at one with the world is to have an effect on the world, because unless you're totally like in a hermitude.
Yep. It's true.
Is hermitude used in the correct context there?
No. It's true. It's the idea that everything is constantly rippling, right? Chaos theory, right? Which I know fuck all about, but I think about Jodorowsky. One of my favorite movies of all time, which loops in the studio a lot, is Confession. But it's Jodorowsky's Dune, and essentially it's even the things that whatever you try, even if it doesn't succeed, it has a ripple effect. And I'm constantly thinking about that as well. It's just like there's no choice. You're constantly altering the reality, and you're being altered by it. But that's a heady ass conversation, man.
Yeah, well, it's pretty far from where we started.
But that was also a very important realization for me when I began to feel that just the thoughts that I was having were as powerful as the actions that I was also having, right? And I could feel that the things that I was believing, the stories that I was telling and saying to myself about myself, just even in my own head, were somehow rippling out. And I don't know if that is a sense of mysticism, but it does kind of go back to just like being in these systems early and like seeing and connecting, and like whatever the Ethereum thing was, it didn't really matter. That was a means to almost like express interest, but just like seeing and believing and having that ripple effect and knowing that your artwork is living in this way and touching so many unseen eyes, and having like, I was showing your artwork last night to, some people that were here, and you don't know that. And so we never really know like the total consequences of our actions, and just the silly things we share, and how they can be perceived, and shifting like a global collective consciousness.
I was speaking to the collector Ohms not too long ago, and he mentioned about you, Coborn, that you guys talk, and you talk about being dismayed sometimes at the state of crypto art, and then having this realization that like, okay, well, if we step away, who and with what ethos is going to take our place, right? You mentioned like being early and bringing in this kind of spiritual energy. And I think that like that's what we all try and do in our own ways. I think it's what you try and do with your collecting, and I think it's what you tried to do with what you're trying to do with the museum. I think it's what I try and do with all my writing, is just impart vibes into the ecosystem, because part of the ability of blockchain to energy capture all this disparate energy is it's going to capture anything that's put anywhere near it, right? It's so, Andres, you said the word supercharged. You were talking about yourself, not the blockchain, but it is like this supercharged bug zapper, and everything within its orbit will find its way back to some, being recorded somewhere on it. Even if it's not directly, like, say I write an essay about someone's work, it's not necessarily that essay going to be recorded, but the effects downstream will be indelibly like marked on a block somewhere, like within this ecosystem. It will physically be caught. Like all the ripples somewhere down the road will stick to the glue paper or the fly glue. What do you call that stuff? Anyways, the glue trap that is the blockchain. Yeah. You guys were no help on that one.
No,
but I feel you. It's one of those. It's this weird mystery where we are gonna sometimes we'll be able to see ripple effects of a lot of things, and sometimes we're just not going to be able to based on the short lifespan we have. But I do think that like the intention matters. In any way that you slice it, psychologically, spiritually, like everything. And the fact of the matter is that you guys have put a lot of intention into the space. And sure, you could fucking hang your hat up and get some Acapulco shirts and just run a savage burn on a hotel, like Fear and Loathing style, but and never come back. But like the mark is there, and you guys are constantly leaving more and more and more and more and more, whether it's through writing, through the way they talk to people about the space, the artists presented, like. This has massive ripples, and it's a crazy thing. And I think intention does matter. And
we should have this guy back on, huh?
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah,
check is in the mail.
You're anti-guru. I come from based on my background, and based also because I have Adina and I essentially our feedback loop for ourselves with this. Adina, for those listening, is my wonderful fiance, who's a writer, animator, painter, and a general genius, without whom I would be in a ditch. So she'll hear this later. We feedback loop this thing because we're 100% of the belief that whatever you believe is true, and whatever you intake really matters. And
with your mind, you make the world, right? That's what the Buddha said.
Oh yes, and stepping away is also equally important to that, right? It's like you need to allow the thing to grow and rebound, so you're not so concerned over watering the plant, to continue to mix that stupid ass metaphor. But like it really is your intention. If your intention for the space is this is a fucking revolution, and you're coming in and with all of your being, you're going, this is a fucking revolution, and it's so much fun for me to scream off the goddamn rooftops that this is a fucking revolution. A revolution you shall have, and it's happening, right? Despite dips, despite markets, despite everything, it's like the belief is there, the collection is there. You got like it's just the people are there, the culture is there, like it's just it's already going, like it's already going.
The train has left the station for sure.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do at this point. All of the influences are there. And the wisdom is there too, but that's me going on a massive tangent.
Take us. What wisdom is there? I'm curious. When you say that, what are you thinking of?
I think that what we're seeing right now is that I know Max. I know that at least for Coburn came in and is full on OG, like status, like silver key to the crypto city type beat in terms of like. There was a way that I know you've been seeing the space, and that you came into the space kind of how a lot of artists are coming into the space now, where there was a collective of people, it was not that big, and there was a lot of idealism in the space. Just before the entire art market seemed to recognize that there's money to be made here, and coins to be gambled and lost and won again, and metas to be followed, and blah 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 blah, jargon until finally you have this crash. And what I'm seeing here is that the crypto art world that developed through that idealism and birthed this massive market has already gone through essentially terrible twos, and is now finding real wisdom and self-awareness. Everything from a collector from PFPs no longer collecting PFPs and really only strictly going to art. Some people finding like additions and going from there. collectors that have been collecting for a long time with massive collections, really just like zeroing in on like, well, who do I like and who do I want to support. That's been a fucking friend to me through all this craziness. It's really interesting because it's if you look at it from the outside, the entire organism that we're a part of is really evolving in a really insane way. And you're seeing it in terms of, who knows if they'll rebound. I'm sure they will, but like the apes going and having a downturn, the generative art having a crazy renaissance, right? It's like there's a maturation happening that is that can be felt and seen, which is something that I don't think you could do before with a culture, in terms of its visibility being so grossly there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, even just it's the ease with which you can see it too. It's the ease. Like, so much of the research I do on these pieces I write is just going back and seeing when things were minted, who was bidding on them, right? There's so much that you can tell within that culture. You know, we have this application that uses Filecoin, and it backs up so many states of the museum. You know, we have the community collection, which is this decentralized art collection, and it's hard now when we're right in it, but 5-10 years down the road, you're going to be able to use this like Filecoin application more or less to be able to see at any given point what people were collecting, what people deemed important enough from their collections to put into the museum. I mean, I've already seen it. At the very beginning, so much of that community collection was PFPs, because those were the kinds of NFTs that people had on hand in their wallets. And you can just go through, and even if you just have fleeting familiarity with it, you see the general tenor of what people are getting in touch with, what they're actually accumulating, and then what they want to express. Like, that's just changing over time. And you can see really, really specifically like how people's collections are changing over time, how collectors their sensibilities are evolving. Who did I speak to? I think it was Tennessee Jed who had told me that
Man himself.
Yeah, he can look back through his own like collection and see when he was really sad or melancholy, because there'll be a bubble of pieces that he had collected from around that time. And then when he comes out of that period, his sensibilities change. Colburn, maybe you have the same experience in your collection.
Just like a song that brings you right back, the pieces bring you right back to exactly who you were at that time, and what you were doing and why you were doing it and what you were trying to express. And again, it's once it even changes hands and goes, and when people talk about provenance and we talk about this unseen energy that's like put into these pieces, and almost like knowing secrets of people who might have been creating under aliases in different places to do more experimental things. Like, there's so many little untold stories that are captured there but are untold, right? And never in a million years will we all be able to come together to like tell all of those cool little facets, interesting things that we would just love, but they're there. Like, energetically they're attached and they're in those transactions, and it speaks and adds, I think, to the value of those pieces.
Yeah, it's like Una, what with the wash trade, right? And it's like just on into the blockchain with her milking the artist piece. Like, again, that energy, that story recorded on the blockchain and kind of purposefully forgotten. Or you were telling me about what the Druid, right, who would put $1 bid on all the artworks on Super Rare, like indelibly lending a bit of themselves to all these artworks, to all of these different transactions.
Let's tell Andres the story of the Druid, because this guy is legendary and he just dropped.
It sounds
off,
crazy.
right?
Are you fucking kidding me?
No, so the Druid would like less than $1. His thing was like, on any old, forgotten, untouched piece, anything really that he liked, he would bid like 0.0001 Ethereum, right? And people sold him a mountain of work, right? Wow. And eventually when Super Rare started picking back up, he was like reselling and flipping, and I bought like a lot of like Robness and Max Osiris off of him. And he wrote me one day, he's like, look, I just bought like a bunch of acres, in Canada, and I'm out. Like, and people would be like, like nobody else had like the gall to be able to do this to artists, but like the Druid had this identity, and he would just be like the Druid method, and he wouldn't care.
What a maniac! He's fucking. Who's the? I'm gonna ask a question that's gonna sound retarded. H. Blavatsky, the guru of theosophy, No offense to Theosophists. I personally think she was full of shit, but that's neither here nor there. She was a very charismatic lady, and one of the more popular stories about her that I know of is that she would go on trains and just fucking toss seeds out in front of followers and shit. They'd be like, "Why do you do that?" It's like, "Well, there's a chance that shit takes root." And I think that's a very magical, mystical attitude in terms of just like, yeah, I'm gonna like fucking see where this pans out, and why not? It's gonna be the most fun. And I find that funny in terms of looking at a collection as a bit of a portrait of the person's soul up until that point, right? A very visible film strip-ish, I guess. With Jed is like, I met Jed. Jed's fucking great. He's fucking hysterical.
Yes,
And
he
I
is.
met him and we bonded on the dick butts. Do you know what I mean? Which,
Yeah.
fuck, there's not a day that goes by I don't regret not buying a dick butt. Not because of the money amount, but because of like what that meant to me at the time in terms of the crypto art space, in terms of like at the time of their inception, I was, there's all these weird Beanie Baby type, different animal themed shit, and it's just like it's kind of like cute but not funny. Like, why would it be popular? But I understood almost immediately that like shit makes me laugh. Like this the provenance is the amount of fun I'm having with this potential project, and again, I regret not buying. I was an admirer from afar, for sure. And he has a ton of them, and he's just fucking that beautiful, beautiful man. God damn it.
Truly.
So Andres, you may not know this, but I speak a lot about my I'm a recovering Solana PFP addict. Well, recovering and relapsing.
How does that mean? That sounds so much regret.
It's great. It's one of my favorite things that I do. It's at least a topic of conversation. But in a lot of these Solana PFP ecosystems, there are of course these like big influencer names, and again, we were just talking about like how the Druid would affix themselves to these pieces of art kind of forevermore just by bidding on them. But people buy NFTs for more money if they had been in a certain collection beforehand. And I think that that's a really interesting, like it just touches, like just because the NFT has touched somebody, it has a different kind of value, not even a financial value necessarily, but it's very similar to like what was it? Aaron Judge hit the 62 home run ball last year, and the guy who caught it was able to like he sold it at once for like $3 million. And again, it's like the theoretical cultural value of the thing that is giving it all of its value, but more than that, the relationship that people then have to that object. Just like essentially like this timestamp of Aaron Judge's bat hitting that ball and the distance it traveled is the signature on that object, in the same way that the Druid's 0.001 bid is also his signature on the object. So for whatever reason, if one of the effects of these podcasts is that the Druid's cultural value skyrockets, their legend grows, well, suddenly all those artworks are the bid of his, just because that had happened in the past, because it bears that like tiny signature, like it's imbued with that energy. I don't know if maybe that's a super obvious point.
No, not at all. I mean, I was talking earlier. It's like you have a small, like the small microcosm of a general art world, right? But like these figures become incredibly legendary, and we're seeing it in hyper time. We're seeing it in fucking fast forward. We're not seeing Peggy Guggenheim saves all the surrealists from fucking Europe, brings them to New York, puts on a show, and it's written in the history books. We're seeing like it's a collector with a name, with a personality, with everything visible that you can kind of bring in. And the collector's journey and the artist's journey is the thing that ends up being written about. Like that's the history. We just have the incredible luck that we can see it again, like I said, in real time. What that'll look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now is like I said, ripples. We can only imagine. Like it's a crazy thing, you know?
I mean, it's interesting to me just going off of that, and I think we see it more in the reverse, is like kind of more some of the big name, big ego collectors taking in certain artists and like trying to bid them up, and then it kind of ultimately falling flat, right? This was never really about who got the highest, I feel like, but who kind of extended the widest. And I think, in this paradigm, any artist who like makes themselves beholden to somebody who is like saying they are going to create something for them is almost missing the point, because those systems and that way to travel, just it's not the reality of what we're dealing with.
So talk about the imbalance between the potentially toxic artist-collector relationship a little bit here.
Sure.
Right. It's like the there, you know, within the space there are abusers may or may not be a good enough or too intense enough word, but like yeah, there definitely is. There are power dynamics, but that are definitely at play, and artists who want to have the biggest, most wonderful, explosive, and easiest break you can, so you can have financial freedom. And if somebody promises you, you know, the stars, maybe you'll hit the moon, right? But I've always been of the belief that the relationships between everybody are really important. For me, this is why I really love the idea of my collectors are my friends. Right, like my collectors are my friends. I hang out with them. I can chill with them. We can resonate. We can vibe. I make sure of it. With very few exceptions, I think I don't personally go out of my way to meet my my collectors whenever possible. Right, one-on-ones are a bit easier. Editions are a little bit harder because higher volume and lots of, you know. But like, I really want to know whoever's taking this home, like. Am I going to be able to come visit? Are we going to be able to hang out? Like, are we going to be able to break bread and drink, right? You know, like, and smoke and hang out? Like, is that going to be a warm relationship? And I think that has done me a great service in terms of who I am, and also the very Jewish certainty of one eyebrow up at all times. You know, like that's a very Talmudic. That is very important. That you know I already had and Adina already had and.
Well, I don't know if you can see, but one of my eyebrows is permanently just like slightly higher than the others. Like
you see, it's there.
It's like there. A little bit higher.
It's a genetic precondition that comes. It's our gift. But like, I do think that I won't say I have an incredible nose for bullshit or for someone that's trying to fuck with me. But like, it does behoove one to develop that, whether it's by instinct or by getting yourself hit once and then never again, right? Which is. Neither here nor there.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of reasons I envy artists, like visual artists. There's a lot of things that I think as a writer you're denied that is shared by pretty much every other art form. Most specifically, like the isolation of writing. It can never be a collaborative act. Not really. More on that later or another time, probably. But one of the things that I think as a writer, you do have that is difficult for artists is that visual artistry is the only art form I can think of where scarcity is not just imposed. It's like an absolute necessity, or at least has been a necessity to this point, right? That you can only have one collector for a piece or 10 collectors or 100 collectors, but have a finite amount of collectors for a piece. I mean, nowhere else is that enforced. In every kind of narrative art form and every kind of theatrical art form, you know, even the culinary arts, your goal is to bring your work to as many people as possible, and it is only judged on the wide basis of the consumption. Whereas with visual artistry, of course, it's inherently different because it's not about how many people you can bring your art to, it's how much value can one person, or you know, the finite amount of people that are collecting your work have. And it does obviously lend to predatory relationships. You know, I feel like we always, for whatever reason, come back to this like 0-1 concept, Colburn, that you're working on. But I do think that there's so much more to talk about this idea of like abandoning the idea of scarcity that is so integral to crypto art. I mean, before it was crypto art, it was rare digital art. But like, why does it need to be rare? There is no inherent necessity for it. On an economic level, you can see why it's beholden to a certain model, and because that model has been proven successful. But there is no inherent reason why the goal of an artwork shouldn't be to reach as many people as possible. Not in the way in which you see it and say that's pretty, but in the way in which your ownership of it and your daily interaction with it is really providing you a kind of nourishment. And we haven't seen that at all, really. And I don't know if it's possible with like even the technology we have yet. Outside, I mean, I guess it's different than an open edition. That's not necessarily what I'm thinking of. Somebody save me from this point that I can't quite make.
Welcome to why museums are a thing, and nonprofits, and art for art's sake, right? This is why I see 0-1 is very much, of course, it's coming from a non-for-profit. But it's like, why were museums created? It was to democratize art, much like democratize art making has happened with a little bit of AI, right? But like the model that we currently have is still capitalist, right? Like it's not. I don't believe it's gonna go away without some prolonged, fucking gentle nudging. God, that sounds weird. Jesus Christ. I don't want any part of that. The way it sounded coming out of my mouth, but I do think like, yeah, it's like we you know, you do want to have this shared experience with art, and it's a constant question, right? Is like we're in crypto art in particular, we're interacting with a marketplace almost all the time, right? Even tweeting is tweeting some bullshit, some shit post is interacting with the market, and I don't know how much that can be. That is just part of the time. Like, it's like you can't really run away from that, especially if your livelihood depends on it. But where the non-for-profit comes in is just great, because it's like let's be able to look at the art for art's sake. And what I find, hopefully this is on what you're talking about, but I constantly have to remind artists not to look at galleries and auction houses as their means to expand their repertoire in the traditional art world, right? Because we had the downturn with crypto art, and we had a lot of artists going like, well, what do I do? Like, how do I get into a gallery? And I go, no, like slow down. We have these edifices in society since the time of Napoleon, which is people donate to this superstructure that houses art that you can go see anytime. The reason we can go to the Met and like go and hang out in there at any time and see such a crazy collections, because that's multiple collections folded into one. And they serve a purpose for artists as well, because they're also direct. They were the previously most direct way that you could get in contact with collectors outside of and foundations outside of your dealer and your curator or your gallerist, right? Who would take their 30% cut to like keep the lights on or whatever, and then move on, right? So it's I hope this is salient in any way to what you said, because I'm just like yeah, there's lots of around.
It is. I'm we have to wrap up soon, but what this is making me think of is when I was like 16 or 17, I went to Paris for the first time. And I was at the Louvre, and of course you go into that room with the Mona Lisa, and right across from the Mona Lisa, which is a pretty diminutive painting behind glass that everybody's looking at.
Everybody always says it's small. They're like,
it's tiny. It's like it can't be more than like 3 or 4 feet high. And right across from it is across the half of the room is The Wedding Feast of Cana by Paolo Veronese, which is the largest piece in the Louvre. It is a giant, like 20 by 35 foot painting. And I remember it's still the thing that I think is it's integral to the work of the Mona Lisa for me. I'm like, this work is so diminutive, it's so unimpressive, and it's across from like this apex of artistry, this incredible demonstration of vision and talent and scope. And something about what you were just saying has like kind of filled in the blank for me about why that juxtaposition is there, and the importance of putting a work in a museum and letting, I don't know, like the cultural value kind of emerge from its exposure to as many collectors as possible. Because of course you think about why that juxtaposition would be happening, and on a purely technical basis, there's no comparison, but it's not about the technical basis, or rather the technical basis is subservient to the cultural basis, which is kind of what we've been saying, which is you put this thing in a museum and you let the people choose what is most meaningful to them. And there's not always a sense in what they choose. There's not always, it's not always about technical admiration. Sometimes that's secondary, tertiary, or even unimportant altogether, but just providing the option for the masses to glom onto whatever they're going to glom onto and form that wave and form that, I don't know, all-encompassing.
Look at that curation though. Like, think about that. Like, okay, like the idea of you've curated this space for people to come in and look at the art. And what I find really beautiful that I've seen it at the Met, I've seen it at the Louvre, I've seen it in the Dali Museum in Figueras, and even the one in St. Petersburg right here, where your curation says, in this particular occasion, you see that tiny painting there that you've seen your whole fucking life? Look up, it's so small. It's like, fucking, what is this? It's like, right, it's like, well, and it's right next to this giant one, which immediately on its face makes you go, what the fuck? And you're like, but then it's like, what's it really trying to tell you? It's like these two things may look like one is larger and one is smaller, but in fact they have the same goddamn ripple. And I would argue that the smaller stone has the greater ripple. There's something in that sentence there that whatever. I'm not gonna stroke myself off right on camera just yet, but like like we have like there's something beautiful about that, and I've seen that multiple times where it's done where I think it's interesting looking at an artist's work, particularly painters, right, where it's very visible, and sculptors as well, where you can see large works and small works, that potentially have the same amount of work put into them, but it's our at first glance going like the large work is that much more like Titanic, like bring the hammer down. But in reality, like when I went to the Dali Museum, the small works were the ones that really fucked with me. The big ones floored me, but they allowed me to go into the smaller ones with a sense of like intimateness and grace. And it also allowed me to see the differences between what the artist might be able to do on a technical level. And it's a Dali where you're like, you can work in tiny little detail, which he excelled at, or you work in massive brush strokes, which he was not so good at. But my point was that the curation can really do a lot in terms of telling you like how you should look at the piece, right? Like that's the reason why it's seen everywhere, despite being a minuscule, not even the best Leonardo, obviously. But there's a reason why it's doing that, and just leaves you pondering: is it the mystery? Is it the mystery of the sensuality and sexuality of that painting? The colors are very specifically like, it looks like a fucking stain of wine that grew a face. Like it's why is that more powerful than the Vernesian in the back? Like what is it about that has captivated us, or at least we've been forced to be captivated by the curation? But that's neither here nor there.
Well, it's not always about how it should be, how a work should be treated, but I think even better, it's how a work can be understood within that new context. But this is obviously a really pregnant topic, and I feel like we could go for another hour. So I'm going to have to stop us here by force. Andres, this has been a wonderful conversation. Please come on back and we can continue this. We'll pick up where we left off.
I'm so pleased.
Yeah, I'm pleased too. Any last words, guys, before we go off? Andres, anything you want to say to the people before we get out of here?
Nothing. Mocha's the bomb. Love you guys. It's been great. And no. I'm going to go back into the studio after this, really. So what else is there to say?
Colborne, last words?
What is it? In the land of the lost, don't follow the blinds, right? So figure out what you want to do, what you're trying to achieve, and you will inevitably make it happen. But if you are feeling like you don't know where to go, probably the best thing you can do is kind of just sit there and observe. Don't follow the person that's going to pull you in any direction. And a lot of this is just an exercise in being lost and kind of accepting that and being observational as opposed to impressionable.
Or aprender en los coñazos, which means to learn by getting hit, right? Learn through the experience and then observe, and then don't be stupid a second time. It's cool.
Well said, gentlemen. Well, this has been a truly fantastic episode of the Mocha Live podcast. We hope you join us again next week at the same bat time, same bat channel. We are getting out of here. Andres, Colborne, thank you very much, and see everybody next week.